Welcome back to Big Questions. I'm Dr. Suzanne Rivera. Most of us already know about the talk. That's the conversation about the dangers of systemic racism that many Black and brown parents have with their children when they reach a certain age to warn and protect them. What's less understood is how white parents are talking about systemic racism with their children. Are they talking about it at all? And if they are, what exactly are they choosing to discuss? Those are the big questions that Cari Gillen-O'Neel has been digging into with her latest research. Dr. Gillen-O'Neel is an associate professor of psychology, and she joins me now. Welcome, Professor Gillen-O'Neel.
Thanks for having me.
So what do we know about how white parents are talking with their kids about racism?
Yeah, so a lot of the existing research suggests that they're not. Or when they are, they're doing this very generic kind of colorblind, like, oh, treat everyone the same, kind of just really generic conversation. And I think it's important to remember that they're doing that for good intentions, right? They really do want their kids to have positive racial attitudes and not be racist. But their choice to avoid the topic or just rely on colorblindness is really rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of child development. It's based on this idea that, oh, if I just put my kids in diverse environments and never mention race at all, that my kids will grow up to be anti-racist. But actually that turns out to not be the case. We know from developmental science that by like 3 months old, so teeny tiny little peanut babies, kids are already noticing differences in skin color. They're already noticing race. And then by preschool, so like by age 3, white kids in particular are already starting to associate Black and brown folks with negative attributes. And so this is really like, just kids are soaking this stuff up. And I think Dr. Beverly Tatum gives us a really nice analogy to think about this. She talks about racism in our society as being like the smog in our air. It's there, it's all around us. And if we don't actively combat that, we and our kids are just breathing it in. And of course they're developing racist attitudes.
So in your research, what did you learn about white families who are going beyond the concept of colorblindness?
Yeah, so we suspected that there would be some families, right, that were doing that. And there was a couple reasons. We knew historically there were always white families who did care about these issues. And then also just thinking about our current events, right? So many current events are really pointing out the oppression and racism that are happening in our society. We've got tiki torches and separations at the border. And so we did suspect that there were some families that were going beyond colorblindness. So we recruited a group of white parents who have white kids, and we specifically went to a school that has a social justice focus, because we figured if any families are going beyond colorblindness, it would be the kinds of families that send their kids to that kind of school.
And what were some of the common themes you found? I imagine the conversations varied quite a bit between families.
Yeah, so one thing that was pretty universally true across all these families was that they really did explicitly want to go beyond colorblindness. And in fact, many families said things like, well, if you don't see race, how are you going to see racism, right? So they recognized that colorblindness wasn't enough. And some of there were lots of different themes of the goals that parents brought up, but the most common ones were ones that really related to actively addressing systemic inequalities. So things like being aware of their own privilege. The parents wanted their kids to be aware of the privilege that they had. Being aware of racism that can happen to Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color. And also taking action. A lot of parents wanted their kids to do something about these racial inequalities that they wanted them to understand. And so really all of the most common themes that we saw were about going beyond this and really understanding the systemic racial inequalities that exist in our society. The one thing that did vary between families was the specificity with which they talked about these things. So just for example, even though understanding racism was a really common theme, some parents were pretty vague about it, like, oh, I want them to understand that some people don't get treated fairly because of the color of their skin. Whereas all the way to the other side, some parents were talking about histories of oppression and slavery and Jim Crow and redlining, and then tracing those histories to the current manifestations of that. And so there was, even though, you know, understanding racism was a theme that most families wanted, there was a range of kind of the specificity that went into that.
Yeah, so
goal.
a high degree of variability.
Exactly.
Well, what's next for you then? Where do you intend to go with this research?
Right. So this project was first just looking at the goals. You know, when parents say, when we ask them, what do you want your kid to understand? What do they say? So the next question is, well, what do the parents actually do, right? So what are the conversations that they're having? What are the actions that they're taking to help their kids get to that goal? And so we also asked them that during the interview. And so right now, actually, shout out to my 3 RAs, Luna, Nancy, and Vicky. We are analyzing those data to try to figure out what are parents actually doing. And we suspect we're going to see a range there too, right? Where for some families, the goals and the practices are going to align very well. Whereas for other families, there might be more of a misalignment where they're sort of talking the talk without actually walking the walk, right? And then the second big goal, ultimately what we want to do is to be able to make recommendations to parents, to be able to say, oh, if you want your kids to have these values, here are the ways that you should be raising them, right? And so the next big step is going to be to match parent practices with kids' attitudes so that we can really see like, oh, kids who have really positive racial attitudes, their parents are doing X, Y, and Z. And so then we can offer those recommendations. But I guess one thing that I'll say is that even that we don't have those specific recommendations yet, what the vast, you know, wealth of research is suggesting so far is that we have to be doing something. And even if it's not perfect, that's what's the saying, perfect is the enemy of good, right? And good enough is good. We need to be talking with our kids about race and sharing our racial values with them to try to counteract some of that racist smog that's out there.
Really important, thank you. Dr. Cari Gillen-O'Neel is an associate professor of psychology at Macalester. Professor, thank you so much for being here and sharing your research with us.
Thanks for having me.